beautiful people. Now, this video is going to be something a little bit different because while it is technically a vlog of a movie that I saw in theaters recently, it is a review of an older movie. An older movie that is near and dear to my heart in a lot of different ways. If any of you guys have been around for a while, and if any of you guys know me personally, you know that I am a massive fan of the Muppets, but also a fan of the works of Jim Henson in general. And so, naturally, I really enjoy the film Labyrinth. Labyrinth, I think, is the second best film that Jim Henson ever directed. I know it's not saying much because he's only directed three movies, but I think Labyrinth is really great. Compare it to the other fantasy film that he directed, Dark Crystal. While I still like Dark Crystal, there's a lot of problems with it. Mainly the story is just not there. It's mostly just a bunch of really cool looking fantasy creatures just kind of doing stuff. And a lot of my problems with the Dark Crystal movie were fixed with the Netflix series that sadly only lasted one season. And, some of my big issues were addressed in Labyrinth, where, yeah, it does actually have a story, but we'll get to that later. The point is, I was actually lucky enough to see a showing of Labyrinth on the big screen in the past couple of weeks. It was awesome. My local theater does this thing every week called Flashback Cinema, where every week they play a different classic film. And I don't usually go to these, but something about it, something about them showcasing Labyrinth made me say, you know what? I gotta go. I gotta go and watch Labyrinth in a theater. And on the subject of Jim Henson movies being re-released in theaters, they're doing the Muppet movie too later this month actually. My theater's Flashback Cinemas, so that's going to be awesome to see that. I'm definitely seeing that, and and when it comes to like release dates, it's sandwiched in between Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps, so it's going to be a big stretch of films that are appropriate for this channel that I'll be seeing in theaters. And if you guys are wondering why the lighting is kind of pissy today, that's because my ring light decided to crap out on me. It's not working today for some reason. I'll get it looked at later. So please forgive me for the rather amateurish lighting. Literally the only thing that's lighting me is what's above my head right now. And that's less than ideal, and I do apologize for that. But anyway, yeah, let's talk about Labyrinth. First of all, I just want to talk about this cool steelbook I got for Christmas. Oh, look at that. It's beautiful 4K from Shout Factory. Well, technically Shout Studios, but they'll always be Shout Factory to me. Very beautiful. But anyways, Labyrinth is an original story created by Jim Henson and Monty Python writer Terry Williams on basically a mixture between Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz. It's about this teenage girl named Sarah who's forced to look over her baby brother, who she hates, but in the same way that pretty much every older sibling hates their little sibling. And she wishes that the Goblin King would come and take the baby away, not realizing that it would actually be true. So the Goblin King, played by David Bowie, ends up taking the baby and gives her a challenge that if she can get the baby within a certain amount of time, then it's hers. But if she can't, then he stays with the Goblin King. And so she's on a big epic quest to try and save her baby brother before the time runs out. And along the way, she meets a whole bunch of colorful Henson creations and learns a lesson about growing up in the process. You can definitely see with Labyrinth where the inspirations from Wizard of Oz came from, namely a little girl who's sick of her environment being swept away into this magical land where she meets a whole bunch of crazy characters that joins her on her journey to get something familiar back. But you can also see the inspirations from Alice in Wonderland, where it is a little girl being swept away in this world that makes absolutely no sense, and she's just along for the ride and the chaos. But I do want to talk about the four major things that I think makes Labyrinth stick out from those two stories. First off is the humor. Now, when Dark Crystal was a critical failure, one of the things that Jim Henson thought was missing was an element of humor. So the script was filled with a bunch of jokes. I mean, if you get the creator of the Muppets and one of the members of Monty Python to work on a movie together, obviously there's gonna be some comedy in there. So the comedy is a little hit or miss. Not everything in the movie is absolutely hilarious, and I downright say that not many moments made me laugh out loud, but it's kind of like a B tier Muppet joke where, like, it's not the funniest thing in the world, but you definitely get a good chuckle every now and then. So the comedy definitely does help you relate to the characters more in the situation. Another thing that helps this movie stand out is its stunning visuals. I mean, it was Jim Henson production. His Creature Shop did the effects for this. It is absolutely visually stunning with the amazing puppetry. A similar but different style that was used in Dark Crystal, and the same type of puppetry Henson would later use in The Storyteller, and his company would later use that in, say, Farscape, for instance. And I just want to briefly mention, for some of the people that aren't as aware of Muppet terminology as, say, me, for instance. So basically, there is a difference between Labyrinth and the Muppets. It is kind of like, oh, Labyrinth is a Muppet movie, or oh, Labyrinth isn't a Muppet movie, it's just a movie. There is a criteria that Labyrinth falls under, and I will explain that. So there are two different types of categories that Jim Henson properties fall under, at least the ones that heavily utilize puppetry. You have the Muppets and the creatures. Now, the Muppets are exactly what you think they are. They're Jim Henson properties featuring the fun, lighthearted, more simplistic Muppet designs. You know, like The Muppet Show, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, Emmett Otter, The Wubbiest World of Dr. Seuss, Bear in the Big Blue House, and Turkey Hollow. But then on the other side of the coin, you have the creatures. These are Jim Henson properties that primarily use complex puppetry designed by the Jim Henson Creature Shop. This includes properties such as the Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, the Storyteller, Dinosaurs, Earth to Ned, and Farscape. So, as much as us Muppets and Jim Henson fans like to categorize all of these under one umbrella as Jim Henson, there is technically a difference between the two of them. They are technically two different things, but it's kind of like Disney and Pixar in a way, where they are very distinctly different, but no one's really going to crucify you if you decide to put them together. Like, if somebody puts Pixar movies in their Disney collection, like nobody's gonna care, really. Like, I have all of my Jim Henson properties on the shelf right next to each other, including the first season of Saturday Night Live and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. So, screw you. It's all the same thing in my book, even though it does technically have different terminology. But anyway, back to Labyrinth specifically. I think what really works about Labyrinth is the songs. I think the songs in Labyrinth are absolutely amazing. Now, there are about five original songs in the film, I do believe so, and all of them are written by the late, great David Bowie, who also plays the villain of the feature, but we'll get to that in a minute. I think it's interesting how this movie isn't technically a traditional musical. Like, it's a musical, no doubt. Like, there are tons of songs throughout the film, but the grand majority of them are sung by Jareth, the Goblin King. They're Most of them are sung by David Bowie. I don't believe Sarah sings a single song, and there's only like one or two that are sung by other characters. So, Labyrinth goes into an interesting category of movie musicals where it's a musical where the main character doesn't really sing. But you can't really imagine the movie without the songs, especially Dance Magic, because it is a freaking vibe. And most of the songs don't really forward the story, they're all just kind of vibes. And that's another interesting category of musical, where like it's not moving the story forward, but it's also not repeating any information. They're just kind of vibes. But at the end of the day, you wouldn't say that they're wasted time because there's a lot of effort put into them. They're good songs, and everyone's clearly having a lot of fun, especially David Bowie just dancing around like a lunatic. And it's a lot of fun, the music he wrote for this. And personally, I wouldn't imagine the movie without it. And I think, yeah, the music really does serve the movie good. And before I move on to the fourth thing that I think really does make Labyrinth stand out, I want to quickly talk about the performances from the two lead human actors. Now, the actress portraying Sarah is, of course, really great. She would later go on to become a big star. This was her debut, and she does kind of suffer a little bit from like George Lucas style acting. I mean, he was a producer. Lucasfilm did produce this, but at the end of the day, she is still a very good actress in this film, and the performance is really believable as this little girl who just wants to go home, and get her brother back. And but obviously, the stand-up performance is David Bowie as Jareth, the Goblin King himself. Now, David Bowie was never really much of an actor. Obviously, he was a rock star, but his performance in this film kind of transcends just about everything he's ever done because basically like there really is nothing that he's ever done that really surpassed this, at least in terms of like mainstream popularity. Like obviously there are several David Bowie songs that are renowned and famous, but this I feel like is his most widely known popular work, and he's great. Jim Henson knew that he wanted a rock star to play Jareth because that's the type of energy that the character gives off. And yeah, David Bowie delivers it flawlessly. He's great at being seductive. He's awesome. His singing is obviously great. His bulge is pretty big too. Of course, all of the other traditional Henson performers are back at it again. The great majority of them actually don't provide voices for their characters, similar in Dark Crystal, but it's always great to see the familiar names in the credits, especially since this was the first time Kevin Clash worked on a Jim Henson production, who would later be famous for portraying Elmo, even though he wasn't the first person to portray Elmo, but Kevin Clash's portrayal made the character a household name. Shut up. And lastly, I want to get into the fourth thing that I think makes this movie stand out, and that is the theme of growing up. At the beginning of the movie, Sarah is very much still clinging on to the things that she liked as a child. What the frick was that? You'd think that after all these years, I'd remember to turn my phone off when I record. At the beginning of the movie, Sarah is still very much clinging on to a lot of the things that she grew up with, mainly her toys. She acts very childish at the beginning of the movie, which is weird considering how I'm pretty sure she's supposed to be like 16. And she wants to be off doing fantasy stuff. I mean, she's reading some medieval shit at the beginning of the movie, and like there's a scene later towards the end of the film during a ball musical number where she's dancing with Jareth, and it's everything she ever wanted. She got this beautiful man, she's in this medieval setting, she's in a fantasy setting, and it's not what she wants. Much like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, all she really wants to do is find her brother and go home. But what I think what really separates this from the Wizard of Oz parallel is the message of growing up and how her not going with Jareth and making sure that she gets with her brother is a metaphor for her growing up and putting away some more of the silly things of childhood and taking on the responsibility of looking after her brother. And it's not like she's fully throwing away the things that she liked as a child, because at the end of the movie, she is still dancing along with all the friends that she made throughout the course of the film. It's just, time and place. You gotta learn, sometimes you gotta be an adult, but at other times it's okay to cut loose and act like a kid again. And I think that's something that really hit with me different on this rewatch was the message at the end of the day. A lot of people are like, "Oh, it's just silly nonsense," but no, there's a really good message at the end of this film. And that is why I think Labyrinth is a little bit special. And in my opinion, kind of succeeds some of its inspirations. I definitely don't think this is better than The Wizard of Oz. Don't come at me for that one. Or I guess liking The Wizard of Oz is a hot take now. That's a video for another day. But regardless, I think that Labyrinth is truly a spectacular work of art, and it's a dang shame that this was a critical and financial failure upon release and ended up being the last movie, or at least feature-length theatrical film that Jim Henson directed, because afterwards he would mainly just focus on television, and after that he would focusing on selling his company to Disney, and then he died. So that's fun. Even though he tried to get a fourth Muppet movie off the ground and never ended up happening, and yeah, it sucked that, but at least Jim Henson's last feature film was a great send off and was a really great piece of art. And on one last note, something that I've noticed with Labyrinth in the last couple of years was something regarding Jareth and how I viewed him. Labyrinth made me realize that I was bisexual.